Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Hello and welcome. This is another in our ongoing series of discussions on using the technique of intuitive linked communication, ILC for short, how and why the technique is easy to learn and easy to use, what information and insights have been received over the years, how to learn to communicate with non-3D beings, and how to live with greater joy and fulfillment, and so much more. Today's discussion is between myself, Dirk Dunning, and Frank DeMarco. I'm Dirk Dunning. Prior to my retirement, I had a 40-year career as a professional engineer and scientist. I'm also a lifelong explorer of the metaphysical with deep experience in time-space alteration, energy healing, altered states of consciousness, near-death experiences, remote viewing, and a lot more. Frank DeMarco is the co-founder of Hampton Roads Publishing Company and is its chief editor for 16 years. He's the author of 14 books chronicling his groundbreaking work in communication with the non-physical world. Good afternoon, Frank. How are you?
Hey, Dirk. I'm probably as hot as you are out on the West Coast, because on the East Coast, it's summertime.
We're getting there. It's going to get quite hot this afternoon. I was thinking today we might start off, since this is the first in our series, of how we met and see where that takes us.
Yeah. Not that there was anything preordained in it or anything. But you and I were going to the first timeline program at the Monroe Institute, Lee Stone's premier program. And we had been assigned as roommates. And I think we had both arrived within a few minutes of each other. And it was one of those deals where you have a long lost brother that you never knew existed, and all of a sudden there he is. It was nice. It was nice. And of course, there was no external reinforcement of that, as you know. you tell it.
Well, that came next. Yeah, we talked for just a few minutes and clearly hit it off, thick as thieves. For folks who've never been to the Monroe Institute, it's a truly astounding place. For this program, we were at the Nancy Penn Center, which is the original facility. And the room that we were in is the first one on the left as you come in the main door. After we'd talked for a little bit, we came back out through the little library there and went downstairs to meet with whoever else was already there, which is the usual way with a program at Monroe. And as we got downstairs, there were a bunch of folks in the main meeting room, which is called the Fox Den. And there was one gal in particular that several people were working with her because she was having some sort of an issue. And from there...
Well, we jumped in as we often did. I don't know if you always jumped in, but my whole career has been based on where angels fear to tread. And so we did a little energy work on her, and it did help her. And then later, must have been only a few minutes later, she was saying to somebody else, maybe they can help you. And it, that was 22 years ago, so my memory's not quite as sharp on it as it could be. But I think it was a headache, and I believe we took it away pretty quickly. But I do remember you were at her feet, and I was she had her stretched on the floor, I believe. You were at her feet, I was at her head, and I did something. I was using my hand to put energy around her ear. And at the same time, you looked up and said, yeah, that's right. And somebody looked at us and said, how long have you two known each other? And the answer was, maybe about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
For people who've never been to the Monroe Institute, what they probably need to know is that it's full of the most amazing experiences, but it's all commonsensical, it's grounded. If you were to have an abstract description of it, it would sound like, oh, these people are they're way off the wall. But as you yourself know, Dirk, and you're the poster boy for it, people who are pretending in the outside world to be normal come there to be the new normal, to experience, I always call it life in the future. because you're surrounded by people who see the world the way you do, and you're not used to that on the outside world at all.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that always amazed me is the programs have descriptions. Like this particular one was timelines. The first one that people typically have gone to is the Gateway Voyage. But whatever the title of the program itself, though it may have some intent, is only a springboard to what actually happens. Any program can be anything. It's a good excuse. And even more important than what the program and all the exercises and the things that happen during the week are, is the group that gets together. And as with you and I, and in lots of cases, as with that group, it was a group that was called together. And
I think it's always that way, don't you?
Not always, but pretty nearly always. There are some groups that don't gel, but for the most part, it seems that when people decide to come, part of how they decide is that it feels right. Yes, this is the week I need to be there. And that's part of the resonance of the group coming together even before you've ever met. And so you come together as a group of anywhere from 14 to 24, 25 people, and within just a very short period, you're all fast friends.
I will never forget that first interminable afternoon of Gateway when, it's Saturday afternoon, you've all arrived there, the program hasn't started yet. You're sitting around snacking, making polite conversation to all these strangers in the way that you would in ordinary life, because you don't really know them and they don't really know you, and nobody's really putting anything really out there. And then about 3 hours later, or about a half an hour after supper's over, all of a sudden you're part of a group. It's astonishing.
People let their hair down and all the wild stuff comes out. Yeah, it's amazing when we get there, or when any group gets there, there's all these things in life that you've explored and known about that people tend to be shy to talk about because it's not acceptable in polite society. And yet here you end up with a group of people that this is second nature to them. And everybody begins to share what it is that they've been doing and what they've encountered in the world. And then the stories begin to spool out and the week gets just absolutely wild.
I sometimes think that more work is done by people sharing stories in breaks than is done actually in the program per se. That's a wild generalization, but there's something to it.
Now, on the flip side, the programs itself and the materials they're using are absolutely spectacular.
Maybe we should take a minute or two and talk about HemiSync. What do you think?
Yeah, HemiSync and also Monroe Sound Science and the evolution between the two, I think. So in the beginning, Bob Monroe, who created the Institute, had a series of experiences, and that's the subject of his books, and I recommend you go read them. It's a long, wild tale about how he got there. But in the process of it, he was trying to find, being a technical guy himself working in radio, how can I get to these places? What tools can I use to help people get here, to experience what I've now experienced? And in doing that, he pulled together a whole bunch of techniques that come from a lot of other places, partly from hypnosis, partly from all kinds of other groups, and a lot of it from sound, because he was a sound guy. And what he ended up using was a technique that was already known called HemiSync, hemispheric synchronization. And the idea is that you put a tone in each ear that's slightly different in sound. And part of the way the mind works is when it hears sounds that are slightly different, it thinks they're the same and that the difference is telling it about motion and location. Well, using that, you can kind of fake the mind out and have it hear both the middle of those two tones and the difference between them. It ends up with a kind of a warble. Go ahead.
I think originally he was mostly concerned with the difference in tone would make both halves of the brain operate on the same thing. I'm not sure that he even knew about the differential causing sounds that aren't sounds we would not be able to hear with our ears.
I think you're absolutely right. But as time went on, very quickly they learned things like that the 4 hertz tone, which is right at a particular frequency that the brain uses every day when you go to sleep and when you wake up, you enter into this 4 hertz tone kind of in your brain. And what it does is it tells the brainstem essentially to disconnect from the brain. so that the body is not actively connected to the thinking mind. And by doing that, the mind is then free to dream and do things and run and jump and yell and shout and not have the body do those things. Usually. But then the next trick is to add other tones that both deepen that and also that wake up the mind. And so the very first state they introduce you to in the Hemisync series is one called Focus 10, which the number doesn't mean anything, and people get confused by that sometimes. But what it does is it introduces this state where the brainstem disconnects. That's the body asleep part. And then it also puts in beta frequencies that wake up the mind, which is the mind awake part. And it becomes the mind awake, body asleep state, Focus 10. And it is one of the most powerful and most useful states of all the things Monroe ever discovered.
And let me throw in here. I've always thought it was brilliant the way Bob does this on, well, they're not tapes anymore, but they'll always be tapes to me because that's what I was used to. But he would have us there lying on our beds with the earphones on, as Dirk said, with the different tones and different ears. And when he came to Focus 10, he would explain what he was doing. He would bring us there and bring us down, bring us there and bring us down, bring us there and bring us. After you've experienced it 3 times, it's not something that can be explained to you. But if you've experienced it, you can go back there. You can feel it again. You know that famous story of the Japanese man who came and did his gateway. He was a monk. And he said he came down after his first experience with Focus 10. He said, well, that's very interesting. He said, it took me 20 years in the monastery, or whatever they call it, to get to that express. And because he had only been able to be told what it's going to be like, whereas Monroe was able to show him what it was like. And once you know, you know. And that's the beginning. That's the funny part.
In talking to my friend Ralph, he was just digging up that story and talking to Mark Serto, the longtime sound engineer with Bob Monroe. And also, I think Bob McCulloch and other former trainers from back in the day. And yeah, that story is apocryphal. It's one of the central stories.
You don't think it happened?
No, it really happened. By apocryphal, I'm probably using the wrong word, but it's one of the key stories that, you know, the first version of it that I heard, which I don't think is quite right, was that there were 2 monks, and the one came to the trainers and said, this isn't fair. You managed to get people to a state in 10 or 20 minutes that take us 20 years.
That's the idea, pal. So
that's very much what it does.
At this point, anybody who's watching is saying, what is it that they're talking about? We didn't think we were talking about the Monroe Institute. And they don't probably see the reason.
The Monroe Institute is a jumping off point where our common experience, this was a shared experience for us, and the timeline program, which we can go into at another time, also a spectacularly good program. All of them are great in very different ways. But those were also, I think, then the spring off point for you later as you're experiencing other things in the world. And that probably leads us naturally to where we're really starting from. Whatever got you to communicating as you do that became intuitive link communication? How did you get there?
It's not a 10-second story, though.
Go for it.
Like so many people, I had read about Edgar Cayce, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if you were a special person and could do something like that, you know, to be in trance? And not having any way to know how to do it, I did what I thought you should do. You know, you lie without moving, and you do everything that I could think of, none of which worked. Parenthetically, I'll say there's an advantage to having done all the things wrong, because it seems to give you a firmer position when you finally got them right, because you know some of the things that don't work. Well, I met a very, very talented psychic only a couple of months before I went to Gateway, which was back in '92. And she got me in exactly the right frame of mind to think that maybe something could change. Because by this time I was 46 years old, and I had been wanting all of these abilities, or all of this, let's say, a more expanded world, you know, a more meaningful life. Didn't have it, couldn't find it. I couldn't figure out a way to do what Edgar Cayce did, even if I had his talent, which I had no idea. I don't think I had even heard of Seth in those days, which is a little hard to believe in retrospect. But when I went to Gateway, I was already, by the time I did Gateway in December of '92, I had done just a little bit, just a couple of times, where I finally began talking to what I call the guys upstairs, which is just a way of saying I don't know who they are and I don't need to know. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But rather than saying I'm talking to Count Saint Germain, or I'm talking to Jesus or whatever, or my dead grandfather or whatever, most of the time I'm talking to somebody and don't know who, or somebody's usually. The only thing is I have set up in advance, I won't talk with anybody who's, Monroe used to say, they want to talk to somebody at my own level of being or higher. But I always said of someone who is not of malign intent. I just took once you take their best wishes for granted, that sort of sets up the thing. Well, by the time I went to Gateway, I had tried for about, I don't know, maybe 5 years to do automatic writing. And as usual, I had the wrong idea of what it was and how to do it. And so nothing that I did would work. I'd put my pen there and wait for something to happen and nothing happened. So, okay, well, I'll move the pen and help it out, right? So get some very nice squiggles that way. Well, I'll make repetitive motion. None of that worked because there's no reason why it ever should have worked. But I didn't know any better. Finally, this sounds like nothing at all, Dirk, but as you know, this is the key. Finally, I stopped criticizing what I was doing and just went with the feeling of it and said, well, I don't know if this makes any sense or not, but let's try this. And you and I, how many programs have we come down to the joint meeting of the debrief? And as soon as you hear somebody saying, well, I'm probably just making this up, but you're going to hear a real experience because if something came out of the blue, they didn't program it, but it happened anyway. And they're not quite sure they're ready to believe something really happened. So they must be making it up.
Or as one of my very dear friends said in a Lifeline program repeatedly, she would, everybody would go around and share, and you're not required to, but typically everybody does. And we'd finally get around at the end, and she was the last one, and people would, say her name, and she'd say, what? And a couple of times, it's like, well, nothing happened. Nothing? Well, I just keep having these stupid dreams. Really? Dreams? And then she would lay out for us this incredible story that was among the most meaningful of any in the group.
But she had already decided ahead of time without knowing that she had decided, because it was a robot working below her level of consciousness saying, if you haven't done it, it didn't happen or it's meaningless. Well, anyway, to answer your original question, after Gateway, I got in touch with, as I said, the guys, and suddenly I was able to have conversations with them in my way. And my way was, I've kept a journal since I was 20 years old. And it's a spiral bound journal. I would get up maybe in the middle of the night, and I would ask a question, or if I didn't have a question, I would say, well, what should I be asking if I had enough sense to know what it is I should be asking? As long as you give an entree, they're able and willing to respond. At one point, much later, they said, we're the record, you're the needle. They have the information, but ours is the place that says this rather than this, here rather than there. And which shows how retro my guys are, by the way, records and needles, but still, can't have everything. That went on for many years, and I got good information from it. It changed. It's funny how things happen. You may know, I mean, the viewer may know, I think, Dirk, you will know, that like 100 years ago, when there were mediums trying to access the other world, they would have to find what they called a controller. It would be some particular spirit who in turn would direct them to somebody else. And this seems to have been necessary at that time. Certainly they thought it was necessary. Well, this is what I knew, so this is what I thought would happen. But it must have been 2005, this was after I met you actually, I had put together pieces of what I regarded as past lives. And I knew one of them, a Welsh journalist who lived in the 18 and 1900s, David Pryor. And I asked David, would you put me in touch with, I forget who it was. And he did. And, it was with Joe Smallwood.
Yes.
Now, because it came by way of David, I can't tell you why this happened, but I can tell you it was because of that. I was able to talk to Joe Smallwood in a way that I couldn't have done before. And actually, it was like getting his life story and asking him questions and going back and forth. From that point on, I was able, that was the actual beginning of intuitive link communication. the communication was always there, but it was always more passive. I'm here, I'll be glad to take anything you want to give me. But they quickly brought me up to speed and showed me that the more active you are there, the more you can get out of it. And so we'll sometimes argue, we'll go back and forth and make jokes at each other's expense. And it's just like dealing with another person. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you know what? And having said that, much of what I just told you was wrong, because I realized it had to have been before it was 2000. It was a series of sessions in the black box with Skip.
Right.
My own life is looking more and more like fiction because I can never keep the plot straight.
Well, as we've talked, I look back at my life now, and there's so many things that happened that just simply are, as telling them as stories, they sound impossible.
Not only that, but they all mixed up.
Yeah, and they all get mixed up, and there's this long series. The funny thing with Smallwood, I remember you telling me about the stories about Joseph Smallwood and all that. And then I was driving over to the coast one day to my folks' house. They live in Florence, Oregon. And the particular route I drove ended up taking me down a road I really hadn't driven before. And at one point, I'm driving my pickup, and with no indication it was going to happen, no indication of any problems, my muffler failed and fell off the car or the truck.
Fairly dramatic.
It was fairly dramatic, and it's scraping on the ground, and so I pulled off right into a big driveway right there at a post office with a big sign, Smallwood Estates.
I remember now, yeah.
I was like, wait a minute.
Wrecking your muffler, he's not going to buy that. Well, you remember when I went to visit you in Oregon in 2007, I think it was. My first night I was in Portland, and there was the Oregon Historical Society nearby. So I stopped in and I asked this woman who was in charge, was there any record of Joseph Smallwood? Because the story that I had gotten was that he had gone west and had gone to Oregon, had wound up actually on Astoria Island. And she looked and didn't find him, but she said, well, he may have gone east again. He may have, not everybody who came out here stayed. And as soon as she said that, it clicked, but I never would have thought of it. It was just one of those providential things, Again, we're getting into story and we're getting away from what we're really trying to tell people about Housley, but it'll all come together.
It does. Well, and part of this also goes back to Monroe, that one of the things you see happen at programs is people will have experiences which lead to stories, which lead to experiences, which lead to ever greater expansion and considering things you never would have considered before.
And it's so much, it's not exactly pre-programmed, but there's such orchestration in there to make it possible, and I've come to rely on it. I know you have too.
Oh, yeah. So back to the main story.
Was there a main story?
Yeah. So how did ILC come about?
Well, I had moved on to the new land, which is what they call the area around the Monroe Institute. I had moved up there in 1998. And after a while, I didn't want to take a program, but I felt like I wasn't getting any real benefit by being there. It's just tantalizing. There's the candy store, but I'm on the other side of the plate glass from the candy store. And so I sent an email to Skip Atwater, who was the director of the lab at the time, and I told him that. And he said, well, why don't you buy a series of 10 black box sessions? He didn't call it black box. That's my name for it. I forget what he called it. Food things. And I'll explain to people that the black box at Monroe, you lie on a waterbed and you're shielded from everything. Electronics, sound, vision of any kind. You're wearing earphones through which they're putting in the altered tones. There's a microphone above your head, which will pick up you so you can talk back and forth to the monitor who is in another room. And they've got 3 wires on your fingers because they can measure your skin temperature, your galvanic skin response. And what's the other thing? It's the sudorific system, I think, but I can never remember the word.
And all of this is a spin-off of earlier work by John C. Lilly and others, where they were doing sensory deprivation work. Mm-hmm. And so this is a copper-lined room, entirely electronically shielded. The waterbed is a heavy industrial waterbed that's only half filled and nicely warm. And you crawl into that thing and you're just floating in the void in this dark, dark room.
I always had them put a small blanket over me because my temperature would always drop when I did this kind of work. But so since these were a series of sessions, and Skip was always very good about talking to me beforehand about what I hoped to accomplish or what was on my mind, that kind of thing. And that's what we did for 10 sessions, once a week for 10 weeks. And it was, I don't know how to describe it. It was almost, you might call it an experiential tour of coming attractions, because the guys kept, whoever was in charge of the universe that day, kept giving me a little bit of experience of here, and then there'd be nothing else, and a little of this, a little of that. And I figured out later it's because they didn't want me making premature conclusions, and connecting the lines too simply. But it was a really weird set of experiences, because part of it was like being in a dream, and like, well, particularly the time I danced the null, Dirk, I could not remember from one moment to the other what had just happened. It was the strangest experience. That's what always happens in this one particular condition. I don't want to go into it, but there were dreams, there were visions, there were even some words once in a while, although not commonly, and you're trying to figure out what is going on. And don't know. And a lot of it reminded me of dream analysis, Okay, well, I see this picture, but I don't know what it means, and going on. But as the thing went on, they got more and more words, and they got more and more wordy, so that at the end, I don't remember if it's the final session, but at one session, they just came out with this perfect disposition. And I said to Skip that I was I sure hoped that the tape recorder hadn't gone out at that time. If you remember, they would have 2 tapes for redundancy's sake, but in fact they didn't. And then at the end, on the last session, several minutes before it was to end, they gave us a thing that basically said, okay, we're done. We gave you a place to stand. And only in retrospect did I look at it. And of course, I was transcribing these sessions every week, which is a killing job. It's a lot of work. I was transcribing them and sending them out to my friends. And when you looked at it, it was a whole new way. What are we here for? What's the purpose of human life? What is 3D life, and why is 3D life? And these were not, I wasn't getting pietistic responses. I wasn't certainly getting scientific responses. And they weren't mythological either. They were very, I think Dirk, you'll agree, they were very common sense. They really make a strong effort to talk clearly. They follow Abraham Lincoln, who said, use the simplest words, because that way the least intelligent or the least educated people will be able to get it. And the more intelligent and more educated will get it anyway. But if you use words that only the most intelligent ones can get, you'll lose most of your audience. Well, the guys know that, and I don't think they have a real high opinion of our IQ. But they were very clear.
But that also raises the question, how much of this was things you already knew or thought you knew, and how much of this was just from out of the blue?
Dirk, I wound up coming up with a whole distinction of meaningless questions. And that would be one of those meaningless questions. Supposing the information is entirely coming from somebody else outside of non-3D, it still has to function through my mind. And because of that, it means it has to function through my brain. And my brain is hardwired to see and understand things in 3D sequential order, other than if it's getting a gestalt. And so I don't think they can ever clearly be distinguished. And I've decided it isn't important. I remember I was telling a friend of mine who's sort of scientific about this, and this was early on, and he said, well, the first thing you have to do is find out a way to prove who you're talking to, which is exactly the wrong thing. In the first place, you couldn't do it. In the second place, if you could do it, ultimately it's going to rely on some kind of authority. Where are you going to find that authority? And in the third place, it doesn't matter. You have to test the spirits, like the Bible says. You don't take everything that comes as if it was gospel, but you do have to accept it long enough to at least look at it, right? Go ahead, I can't hear you.
And this is part of the world where, being an engineer, I try to explain to people the difference between engineers and scientists, because we work with the same tools mostly. There's a lot of equations engineers use that scientists look at it and cannot figure them out because they're very different. But for an engineer, so long as we can find the data to be reliable, repeatable, and useful, we'll use it. We really want to know how it works, why it works, and all the rest of that. But that comes second to, can we use it? Does it work?
Yeah.
For hard science folks, a lot of them are stuck in a place where, unless they thoroughly understand the mechanisms of how it works and that it matches their existing theory, they can't believe it is real. They're caught in a kind of a double bind. And engineers kind of step past that in some ways.
Even worse than can't believe it's real, they can't allow themselves to experience it.
Yes. Well, we had that in timelines. Oh my God.
I remember. I had to tell it if you could remember it.
That was Wednesday. Oh, wow.
And maybe that's the story for another time.
Yeah, I think so. It was hilarious, but yeah.
It was hilarious and it was exhausting.
Yeah. Well, it only took 3 hours to get through that discussion.
Well, anyway, so ILC basically is the process of you getting into an altered state, which is not a difficult thing to do, and then being prepared either to ask questions and see how they respond, or to say what's on the plate for today and carry it forth from there, and then be actively involved. It's a little bit of a skill, but as you've done it, it's not hard. You have to be both alert, because you're actually absorbing what they're saying. In fact, I'm writing it down, but then also you have to think about it. And then at the same time, you have to be receptive. If you're receptive and not alert, it's not going to work. And certainly if you're alert and not receptive, what are you going to get? Now, this might be
I think we need to step back just a little bit. Part of the reason why we started off talking about Monroe is that the Institute is a place where the whole philosophy that Bob Monroe had is to go find out for yourself.
Yeah. Yes.
And, people would go off and have experiences and whatnot, and they'd come back and they'd want to know what Bob thought. And his answer always was, you tell me.
Yeah.
It was a part of exploration.
There's a joke about TMI trainers. How many trainers does it take to teach a course? I don't know. What do you think?
Exactly. But in that, what it is that the tools that they provide are the training wheels. And once you know how to get there, they're not required. They're still useful sometimes, like having a bicycle, but they're not required. And so the booth sessions, as an example, they use a naked version of the combination, the complex suite of tones that's used for the focus states. And it helps you to get there more easily. But then after like your 10 booth sessions or anything like that, you reach a place where you now know you can go there, you know where there is, and you can do it anywhere, anytime, under any condition.
That's right. When I had finished my 10 sessions, the following July, Rita Warren, who we should talk about, got me a session for my birthday. And after that session, and after I had done all the transcribing and sending it out, I said to her, boy, I wish I could do this all the time. And she said, well, you don't need the black box. And so we began doing it at her house after supper on Tuesday nights when I came home from work. I'd eat supper and change and go. And at first, I had one of those tapes that'll put focus 25 through your. Didn't need that either.
Nope.
You kind of have a tendency to get stuck on certain what would you call them, security blankets in a way, and then you realize you don't need them. It's really natural.
Well, and you go to other traditions, sprinkling salt at the door, wearing a velvet, shawl, putting a purple cloth on the table, lighting candles. All of that stage dressing is not required, but you may find it useful.
Exactly.
I think the other part too, you might go into a bit about what you need to give up for this to work.
Well, that's an interesting thought. You have something in mind, go ahead and say it, and I'll disagree.
Particularly what I'm thinking is, and this is a large focus of how the programs at Neuro Institute work, is it's harder now because of the way technology has changed. But it used to be in the past, particularly with Gateway, you'd arrive and the first thing they would do is ceremonially take away everybody's watches.
Oh, I hated that.
Because they didn't want you paying attention to clocks. And there's only one clock in the building, and it's in the kitchen where you can't go. They call you with bells and gongs for everything, and they take care of everything, and you're perfectly cared for, so there's no issues with any of that. But in the process, the other thing that's happening is They've also removed all the news and the outside sources of things, all the stuff that's part of the conscious world. And so you end up focused in this world of exploring into the means by which the subconscious connects, or however that's working. And you've let go of logical reasoning to a large degree. It's still there, but you mostly let it go.
You know, talking about that background, I cannot believe anymore that when I read Ram Dass so many years ago, I did not understand what he meant by be here now. And that's exactly what the Monroe, that's what they're doing. They're putting you right there, right now. And that's where you need to be, because then you're all in the present. And when you're in the black box, or when you're doing a tape, even more so, because you do literally, well, one of Bob's little rituals, he said, you have a little box next to you. Take your worries, anxieties, and concerns. You don't need them now. You're not going to need them for the next hour. Put them in the box. Close the heavy lid, right? And that was after, I don't know about you, but after a while, I never closed the lid anymore, because I thought, no, I want to connect with everything.
In my first Lifeline program, one of the gals had the idea of using a jewelry box. I like that better, so I then switched to that. And then, like you, I later didn't even bother with any of that, and because it no longer was necessary. It became something that internally I'm doing the basic process without needing to do anything. But the big thing that I think for me was to let the conscious worries about the physical world go away. Set them aside. We don't need them now. And to return to play and to exploration and to experiencing the world and being, as you say, in the now. And those, I think, seem to be key to what we do with ILC.
You know, I think my experience at Monroe is different from many people's, because many people that were there were in a situation at home where it could not be known what they really were and what they really thought, because it would affect their income or whatever. And I was my own boss, and I never cared much anyway. And so I didn't have to do that kind of hiding. And yet there came a time when I realized I had come out of the closet. And rather than sort of quietly apologizing, I would have said, no, well, actually, no, we're right and you're wrong. You know, but it is a step. It's a definite step.
Well, take my example. I was working for the state of Oregon doing technical oversight of the cleanup of the Hanford nuclear mess. About as hard science as you can do. I'm working every day with, double and triple doctorates in every kind of science field you can imagine. And within that world, the paranormal, metaphysics, whatever you want to call it, is frowned upon, shall we say.
Oh, yeah. They would distrust your judgment.
Yeah. And so for credibility reasons, it was important I not talk about anything like that. And so what I would do is basically once a year, and then later twice a year, I'd go off to Monroe Institute. And as I phrased it for my friends, is I'd go back there to erase my mind, to let all the stuff from all of the hard things go away, clean myself up and start new again.
I've often said, I wish I could read a book that had nothing in it except the various excuses people gave their boss and family as to why they were going to Monroe. Well, it's a relaxation seminar. It's a consciousness, anything but the truth.
Well, the best one I heard was one of the guys who I met him in my gateway. He was a particle physicist working in Chicago at one of the big particle accelerators. And he found Monroe so useful, the whole program, that he actually had it written into his federal employment contract that they send him there once a year for vacation. And they did.
I could never persuade my business partner to do that, but actually he didn't need persuading. We both did it. Yeah. Okay. At this point, I get the sense it would be well for us. I'm not sure how we can do it. This is coming to me as I'm talking to you. Let's give people an example of how easy it is to go into that state. But us doing it wouldn't tell them anything. So we need to find a way to explain it. How would we do that?
Well, one of the things we've been talking about in another series with Faith Mesemer is she's having a discussion with you about working with Rita and the books that you wrote about those experiences. One of the things we could do is just simply have you connect with Rita and see what she might share with us about this process from the other side.
I'd be willing to do that. That'd be fine. She may or may not show up. There's no way of knowing.
Right.
But I'm getting a wild sense that we could either explain it in a certain way or demonstrate it in a certain way that somebody watching this could realize, oh, they're not kidding. It really is easy. It really is effective.
Well, we can do it through some anecdotes. But the problem there is it's a matter of being involved in the circle of people who were involved to really have that hammer home. So as an example, there was a Alaskan Airlines plane that crashed off the coast of California. It had the tail assembly failed and it inverted and spiraled down into the ocean. A dear friend of mine had somebody on board the plane that she was very closely connected to, and the family was quite distraught. And she asked me if I could go and talk with him and find out what happened with the plane, and also, what he went through and some other information about things that nobody but the family would know. And so I did. I went and I actually rode the aircraft down as it crashed. I did that 3 times, actually. And there were parts of the story I could share with her, and there were parts I could not, because one of the things about it was I had the very strong sense about morals and ethics and what was really personal to this person and what could be shared and with whom. And it was I felt incredibly honored, and other feelings I don't even know how to put into words, to be in a position to be able to be an intermediary for him. Anyway, I ended up passing back through her to the family a bunch of information, and they confirmed all of it. And for them, what it became is a message about he's okay, everything is fine, that he's moved on to another world, and it's all okay. It's good.
The problem with this, because I've been there, is the temptation will be to hear that, believe you, and say, wouldn't it be great to be a person special who could do that? And
anyone can do this.
I know, but I have a feeling there's a way, if we could find it, to encourage them to really try it on their own. Let's see, what would they need to do? They would need to sit down quietly, try and have no distractions. But if there is distractions, don't obsess over them. Just let them go in. It's like if you're trying to meditate and you hear a truck outside, you don't let the truck ruin the meditation. You just take that extra energy. When
for a lot of people, there's also the problem of being afraid that there may be some evil there. There's no evil there.
The first thing I would say is, if you're afraid of it, maybe you shouldn't be doing it, because that could be one way that your higher self is telling you this is not your path. But assuming that they're not afraid of it, I think it might be as simple. I'm subject to correction here, but sit quietly, expect to have connection.
Know that you can have connection.
Express, but expecting it means it isn't just a theoretical possibility, but that it will happen. And then express your willingness to communicate, maybe with a pen and pencil, maybe with a tape recorder, or maybe just remember it, whatever is easiest for you. And don't expect bells and whistles and the Archangel Gabriel. The difference this may be the clue. The difference between hearing voices from the other side, and of course that's the language. You're not really hearing anything, but you're getting the sense of it in your head, and the chances are you've already been experiencing that and you blew it away. That's just a stray thought. Well, maybe it isn't a stray thought. Take it as potentially an actual communication and think about it. See if it makes sense. And if you don't like it, question it. In a way, ILC is not much different from doing a Zoom or talking on the telephone. You are here, you're talking to something that represents itself as a being on the other end, but you don't know anything about him. For all I know, Dirk is actually not Dirk. He's really a penguin, right?
That's right.
But the machine tells me that it's Dirk, and he sounds like Dirk, so I'm going to take that for granted. But if you, I think, again, using Monroe's way of doing it too, call for somebody who is has your best interest at heart, has something of interest to say to you, or I don't know. Anything to add to that? That should be enough,
Oh,
really.
it just reminds me of a phrase that I don't know this for myself, but I heard it from a friend to be true, and I believe her, that one of the greetings in Minnesota is, "What do you know that's true for sure?"
That'd be a short answer. Not much.
Well, you don't need to be that sure, but have a bit of skepticism throughout. Maybe this is real,
Okay.
maybe it's not, but
Yes.
put it all down.
And you don't need to know
You
whether it's
don't. Yeah, you don't. And the other thing too is that for every person in this, I do this with a lot of folks in doing remote viewing of suggesting to them that their dominant modes, the dominant ways that they get information, differ from person to person. So for one person, it may be that they see imagery in their mind, maybe like a whiteboard in front of them, and they can see the scene playing out. For others, it's ideas just come into their head and they write them down. For others, it's they let go of their hand and draw things. That's my particular mode. Or they write, autographic writing.
Some people get feelings in their body. Some
Exactly.
people just know, and knowing is the most direct and the one that people tend to not pay attention to because it's too direct.
Yep.
One more thing we should mention. Bruce Moen made this wonderful distinction. Very true. You can perceive and you can interpret what you perceived. You can't do them both at the same time. As soon as you perceive something and you start interpreting it, you've stopped perceiving it. Now, it doesn't mean you can't stop interpreting and going back to perceiving, but you have to alternate. You cannot do them both at the same time. If you do a session and the whole thing is perception, nothing wrong with that. Look at it later and analyze it and be sure you're not being a dope. But if you try to analyze without having perceived anything, what are you going to analyze? And if you want proof ahead of time, you can't get it. There's nothing to prove.
And this is the thing about letting the conscious mind step aside for the moment. The conscious mind is where we analyze things and we decide what they are based on inferences and other things. But that's the part we need to let set aside for a moment and just allow the information to come, the raw data.
That's a good point. And I remember a technique that they gave us. Everything we do seems to stem back to Monroe in one way or another. But maybe the guys gave this to me. But when you get something and you don't know what to do with it, no. I'll tell you this in the form of a story. My friend Ed Carter and I were roommates in a program, and he was having a hard time. So he had the bright idea that he would take his left brain and put it in the energy conversion box and close the heavy lid. And of course, when he came out of the program, he had no memory because that's where you get the memory, of what just happened. Something happened, but he had no idea what it was. But that gave me a great idea. And so before the next tape, I said to I idealized that as talking to my own left brain. And I said, you take the pictures, you run the tape recorder. I want to know what we did afterwards, but do that while we have the interaction. And that kept it from interfering. And at the same time, when I came out of that experience, I must have written 10 pages of dialogue. I met my father, who had died several years before. And it was a nice experience. But that was a really good technique. It didn't say, left brain, you're a problem, get out of the way. It said, here's your proper function. Your proper function is to analyze and to record, but not now.
Yeah.
Record it now. We'll analyze it later. And of course, your half of the bargain has to be the willingness to analyze it later. Otherwise, it won't give you the next time, I suspect. Anyway, that's a lot of, but that may be all they need.
And if you remember, Toomey, who was an engineer, had the same experience, that his conscious mind got overly involved. And so he took a little version of himself and put himself in the energy repository box and then blanked out and had no experience at all.
Yeah, big surprise. I miss Mike. How many years has he been dead now? A long time.
Long time.
You could talk to him sometime, maybe. I never have. Have you?
I have not in a long time.
Shall we see if we get Rita or somebody?
Sure. Well, we'll see who. Maybe it's Rita, maybe it's somebody else, but let's do that.
And why don't you do it at the same time and see?
We can try that.
Maybe neither of us will get somebody. Maybe we'll both get. Who knows?
Go for it.
Pose me a question.
What is it we haven't shared with folks that we should share today?
Good question. You think you've told them do it, they haven't necessarily got that one little key that'll persuade them that it's possible, that it's an ordinary, and what you haven't actually said it, although you always think of it, it's an ordinary human ability. It is not an extraordinary ability. If anyone can do it, you can do it. And as I always say, everybody can play chopsticks on the piano. Not everybody's Paderewski, but everybody can play chopsticks. And the way to find out whether you have a talent to play the piano or not is to play. Beyond that, there is no substitute for experience. If you haven't tried it, don't knock it, people used to say. If you have tried it and it hasn't worked, that proves one thing. It proves it didn't work this time. It does not prove it'll never work. And also remember that practice does make perfect. Practice in this case makes possible, because you never can tell what you're doing wrong, that one day you don't do wrong and all of a sudden you get it. Did you
well, I'm hearing somewhat the same answer, though they're referencing Zen Buddhism and other things about some of the lessons from other traditions, where it's in the letting go that you're able to access this information. So long as you try to maintain control to access it, where you're the director, it gets in the way. And it's something that everybody can do. By the way, one of the things that you did, and people may see it if they go back on this recording, was as you're talking to folks or having them talk, kind of using your voice, a couple of things can happen. In my case, one of the things that'll happen is they tend to talk very quickly, faster than I'm thinking. And I'll be listening to myself, and particularly what then happens is they will refer to me by using my name. And I remember the first time that ever happened at your house where we did this, I damn near turned myself inside out, because just saying my own name in reference to myself aloud just was really hard.
It's a strange feeling, and you just saw me do the. I mean, after all these years, it still strikes me sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, say a little more about the Zen, the Buddhist connection.
Well, the whole thing, it's like the various stories from Buddhism and whatnot about how do you fill a strainer with seawater?
Put moss in it.
Well, there's a lot of things you can do, but the principal one is immerse the strainer in the ocean.
Oh.
Nobody said you had to pick the water up. Your logical mind is applying all these criteria that don't apply to solving the problem. And what they're trying to get to with that is that you're caught in your logical mind thinking about things a lot, because that's where we live most of the time. One of the ways that I found for that is to try not to use language per se, and just let the ideas come.
That might not be easy for people. I don't know. So I think that'll be.
It depends on the person. Yeah.
But one thing we haven't mentioned is which you, because we tend to think this is what I want, and I've just told you. But there are other levels of you. There's you, the non-physical us, and the physical us are the same thing in different terrain. And I often will say, I don't know, you tell me. And that's in a way handing the helm over to somebody who's maybe got better vision than I do, or has a wider frame of reference. If you feel like you have to be in control, it's an automatically crippling thing, because you cannot do what you need to do, which is flow.
Right.
Is that a good way to put it?
It is.
So now, after you've finished with this, try this.
Right. And that's the big thing, is take time to set aside distractions in the world. Find someplace relatively quiet. Doesn't have to be perfect, but someplace where the world is not busy pulling on you to get your attention. Turn off the TVs, radios, music, internet, whatever it is. Set all of that aside and go into a quiet place and allow yourself to open to trying to connect with someone that you want to connect with, but not necessarily someone that you're absolutely urgent to connect with, because that may overwhelm you in the beginning. If you've lost a family member or a loved one, that can be a really difficult thing to connect with at first, because the emotions may overwhelm you. Whereas if you connect with someone, say, a close friend has had their partner or family member has passed. That may be an easier route to talk with them or to find them, or somebody associated with them. But there's things like that where you can then just go off and attempt this and see what you get. And don't be self-critical.
Yes, when you said that, it occurred to me something else we haven't mentioned, and that is initially when you're trying to learn that you can do this, don't set the bar too high. Don't ask questions about your health. Don't ask for the answer to the cosmic universe. Don't ask for too much or too wide, but just something on my level that I can get. And don't ask for it to be something that you can prove. You're just making it hard. Just say, I want to have the real experience and I want to learn to do it. Right, Dirk? I mean,
and maybe an ideal one for people who have very close relationship with their pets, if they have a pet who has passed on. That may be a really ideal first contact, is to connect with the spirit of a pet who has passed.
It certainly would. One more thing we haven't mentioned. I guess we'll never run out of things that we need to mention, but it certainly will be that emotional component, which is a part of this. The Course in Miracles says there's only love and fear. I take that to mean there's only expansion toward the world and saying, I am a part of you, you are a part of me, which is love, or no, I am different. There's a difference between us. This me, this is not me. Both of those are normal feelings, and they each have their place in the world. But if you want to do this kind of work, at least temporarily, you need to be in the love expansion mode, not the fear take care of it mode. And you can see, I don't know, maybe I'm making a connection that isn't right, but it seems to me someone trying to prove it while they're doing it would be almost in a fear mode by definition. They're making distinctions, and they don't even know what they're making distinctions about. But they're trying to be, it's a virtue that's turned sour, They're trying to be so honest, and they're trying to be so careful. But if you do things in the wrong way, you can't get them done.
Well, and I think that also flows into the idea that people often live in the world, no matter whether it's science, religion, or anything else, where they have prescribed what the world must be. And part of this, it has nothing to do with any particular tradition or belief system. Anybody can do this. It doesn't contradict any of those. And it's just a matter of being able to set aside for the moment those concerns and just try it.
And the funny thing is, once it works, then it's easier than you could believe, because all of those things that you worried about, you realize aren't true, so that you throw them away. Doctor, I know we're in time space and we have used up an hour, it looks like. People out on the other side of this video are going to go.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we should wrap this one up for now, and we'll come back again and continue the discussion.
I think it'd be great. Thank you for your assistance.
You're welcome. And it's a great talk. Thank you. All right.
If you enjoyed this episode, please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.